Ayahuasca is an extremely scary thing to try. I know because over a year ago, I went on a 4-day long retreat in a different country and I've waited a year to post this video. Now, 1 year on, as I'm actually moving to Spain in a few weeks, after 30 years of living in Scotland, I'm going to explain the raw truth of what I experienced and what you can expect. I think it's important that someone gives you the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And now we're going to cut to a pretty raw and honest conversation of the ins and outs, with no fancy edits from now on. All I would ask, if you take value away from this, I'd love to know below. So, let's get into it.
It's taken me over a year to film this video, and this is my third take of filming it today. I've watched a few of these ayahuasca overview videos and none of them really sat right with me because I feel like they don't tell the full story. Certainly the ones that I watched anyway. They're all very dramatic at the start, and I wanted this to be the kind of raw truth of this is me over a year on from taking it, and I'm actually, to be honest, quite glad that I've not filmed the video until now, because I would have left out a load of context if I'd done it straight afterwards. So I'm going to cover what is ayahuasca, why I decided to take it as someone who's never taken psychedelics before in their life, why I decided to leave my pregnant wife and daughter at home just before my son was born to do this. It wasn't for a party, it was out of complete desperation. I'll give you a little bit of a background in my story. I'm going to try not to go too much on that, and I'll go into my experience. And then I'm going to break down my experience day to day, the lead up to it, and then a year on, kind of what my thoughts are. I'll also timestamp this, so if you can't watch the whole thing just now, or there's certain parts of it that you don't want to watch for whatever reason, then you can skip along to them. So I'll timestamp it after I've edited it. And I've been thinking about how I'm going to film this video, but I decided to just set a couple of cameras up and then I'll just edit it rather than almost like be fake and do anything else other than talk to the camera. So first of all, what is ayahuasca? So actually, probably only a few weeks before I went, I didn't even know what ayahuasca was, which is mental that I decided to do it. But ayahuasca comes from an Amazonian plant, and it's the chacruna vine, I believe. And basically your body produces the chemical that it releases, which is DMT, endogenously, which basically means that it produces it by itself in small quantities. We don't really know what it's there for. There's theories around it's the chemical you release in your dreams or in your brain when you die, and things, and people that have visions and have near-death experiences and whatever talk about DMT being a similar experience to that. I don't know the full ins and outs of that, so I'm not even really going to comment on that. But what I will say, it's like nothing I've ever experienced in my life, and I think about it every single day. So DMT, now people can get through a vape and they can smoke DMT when they're on a night out, which is, to me, mental, because the retreat that I went on was extremely spiritual. I'm not a spiritual person by any means. I was in a bit of a state of desperation to have something to change, and I kind of wanted to share my experience, because I think if you're ever considering anything like this, it should be for the right reasons and not on a night out. So even, for instance, I've never done it, but if you smoke DMT, it lasts about 7 minutes, something like that. This lasts about 7 hours, and there's no getting away from it over the course of days. And it's probably the hardest 4 days of my life. So why did I decide to take ayahuasca? Pretty desperate. It was at the point in my life where I've been once before, where I just didn't want to wake up in the morning. Complete state of overwhelm, complete state of just dreading the day ahead, and I guess complete state, to be honest. And I knew something had to change. And as I said, I'd never heard of it, and I was introduced to it from a friend who went through something very traumatic in his life, and we were on a call before and then after it. I didn't know he was doing it, but he was a completely different person when he came back. And he went through such a traumatic experience that I seen such a difference in him, and I thought I need some of that change, because something needs to change. So that's basically why I decided to take it. It was out of genuinely a state of desperation. So once I was kind of introduced to what ayahuasca was, I'd done a lot of research on it, and booked up, flew a couple of weeks before my son was born, um, to hopefully find a way out. I was really quite skeptical, but always also quite hopeful. 2 weeks before you go through the ayahuasca retreat or experience, if it's done right, you're not allowed any alcohol, no stimulants, which for me means, because I got diagnosed the year before with ADHD, no ADHD medication, no caffeine, no meat, uh, nothing like that. This was the most surreal experience of my life, and it just seems daft not to speak about it. And I guess on the surface of things, there was no reason for me to feel the way that I felt, not wanting to be here, because I had a kid on the way. We've now got 2 kids. We had a couple of properties. Business was going well. I'd built up a large following at that point in time, on a few different social media platforms, and from a on paper standpoint was doing just fine. And I guess like all the material things like cars, houses, you realize how much that doesn't matter, and became so much more prevalent as soon as I had my experience. Yeah, this is hard, but I think it'll be fine when I've edited it. But I'm kind of lost for words, because I don't want to talk about things too much and bore people, but I need to give an appropriate amount of context. Ayahuasca experience. Let's fast forward to when I actually flew to Spain. I was actually kind of regretting it a little bit. Off the flight, I'd hired a car, drove there, allowed me a lot of thinking time. So before I go into the days, so we're going to start with day 1 to day 4. Before I go into the days, shortly before I went on the ayahuasca retreat, I got diagnosed with ADHD. I became a dad, moved my business from owning a gym to online. And when I became a dad, it became completely overwhelming with the responsibilities, I guess. So the more responsibilities that you have with ADHD, with the unorganized brain, then the following, the business side of things, it all got quite a lot. So that was my biggest reason of going. There's going to be things that I might leave out, just because I don't know if I want this on the internet, but I will give you basically everything I experienced as much as I'm willing to share. The place that you go is amazing. All the food and stuff's made for you. There is still no meat at this point, which I actually quite liked, as much as I can't hit my protein. It was interesting to see the different meals and stuff you can make. So you meet everyone first of all. So you meet everyone that's on that same retreat with you. No one knows each other, and they all come. I was the only person, I think, from the UK. Certainly the only person from Scotland, but I was pretty sure I was the only person from the UK there. Saudi Arabia, there was a lot of people there from the Ukraine, Transylvania, of all places, Sweden, Germany, Dubai. I guess what I'm trying to get at is a very cultured place, and as someone who's lived in the south side of Glasgow his whole life, it was quite refreshing, to be honest. And the funny thing was, before I get into any of the serious part, I'm obviously from Glasgow, and English is my first language, and people couldn't understand. None of them spoke great English, but I was the person that they struggled to understand. And I don't even think I have that strong an accent. And English is my first language, and they were all looking at me as if, "What have you just said?" And they all understood each other just fine. So I found that quite funny, to be honest. But onto the more serious stuff and my experience. So day 1, You get there and you meet everyone. You talk about your intentions. It was over a year ago, so I might be getting the order of this slightly mixed up. The amount of trauma and stuff that those people have went through, I almost felt slightly like, why am I here? Because as I've said, like my life on paper looked, if I'd told myself years ago that it was going to be like this, I would have wished for it. Like there's no, um, it was almost felt as if there was no reason for me to be there. So whenever you go into the ceremony room, this is kind of what to expect, because I guess there's a lot of unethical practices. A bed, a bucket, some water. So a bucket if you're sick, which I'll go into in a second. You light a candle, set your intentions of what you want to do. You speak it out loud, or you say it into yourself. You take something that's called an MAO inhibitor, which basically allows you to actually ingest the DMT. So, for instance, if you were to smoke DMT, it would last 7 minutes, whereas when you ingest it via the MAO inhibitor, first of all, it allows you to put it into your bloodstream, um, and have the experience. And the experience genuinely lasts about 7 hours. For me, one day, I think it lasts 8 or 9. I don't know how much to go in because we've not got 8 or 9 hours to talk about it, and there was 4 days. So if you've never taken psychedelics before, which I hadn't, it's the most crazy thing in my life. And I think I said at the start of it, I think about it every single day of my life since. I'll never forget it. The visuals that you experience, the trips, if you like, that you experience, whether you think you've went to another dimension or not, it was just so eye-opening. There was just nothing there to think about other than what it was that you had to think about. And what they say is that you can go in there with the intention, but what ayahuasca does is it allows you to drop your ego. And ego is often misplaced in where people use the word, because ego has very negative connotations. Ego almost, to most people, sounds like they've got an ego, they're arrogant. When in actual fact, ego is, for a lot of people, a kind of protective mechanism that they give themselves to be able to cope with the stresses of life. And ego shows up when they feel devalued, rejected, whatever, to tell themselves a story that might be a little bit of truth in it, but often isn't true, to help them deal with the struggles. Maybe sometimes when people are challenged on something, etc. So this is why I do think in the next however many years, psychedelic led therapy will be a massive thing, and it's not right now, and they're in a lot of testing around different ways of doing it. But for me, this genuinely changed my life, but I'll go into also why it didn't, just because I think that's important a year and a bit on. So day one, I took the inhibitor. The tobacco sniff, I think, is to stop you from falling asleep. It was absolutely horrible. It actually makes me feel sick even just thinking about it. And then you take the ayahuasca and you go lie in your bed, sit in your bed. You're not really meant to talk. It's just a waiting game. And with someone with ADHD, my mind's just going 100 mile an hour. I'm not allowed to get distracted by my phone. I don't have it. And it felt like hours. I don't know if it was minutes or hours, but it felt like hours before anything even changed. And I thought, well, I must be one of the people that this just doesn't work for. And then it hit me. And I'll not be able to explain the visuals because it's impossible to explain them, because I've never experienced it since, and I'll never experience it again because it literally felt more real than real life itself. But what I don't want to speak too much about is certain things. I'll try and choose my words carefully. The first thing that I experienced was something I was actually quite surprised about. I actually died. I went to my own funeral, but my own funeral was also my grandpa's funeral, who's still alive at the time of filming this video. I think he's 89. But my grandpa, very successful man on paper, see, I don't want to upset anyone, but has 5 kids, divorced, lives in basically a mansion by himself. Alcohol problems, addiction problems, and if I'm honest, I think he has undiagnosed ADHD and autism, and that's coming from someone who experiences that themselves. I think what people won't understand unless they've done it is that there's no necessarily words at this point. It's more just realizations. As I say, it allows you to drop the ego. There's no words, but you just come up with these realizations that might take you 6 months of therapy to actually uncover. And I think because it's so dissociative and ego dropping that you have to deal with what's in front of you. And because you're there for hours, there's no distractions, you genuinely have to. And as I went and I looked at my grave and me being dead and my grandpa's funeral, I basically was presented with 2 roads, and one of the roads led towards funeral of both of us, and the other one led towards just a different route. It was a bit unclear at that point what it was, but what it told me is that basically I had a choice to make. I had a choice to make to where I either try and chase the level of success and, I guess, financial status that he has and end up in the same position as him, divorced from my wife and disconnected from my children. And I guess that was really eye-opening for me and a bit unexpected, to be honest. And I'll not go too much into the ins and outs of that. As someone who has struggled with their consumption of alcohol their whole life, that was really interesting to just see the fact that he's in this position nearly 90 years old and he can't go back in time, whereas at this point I wasn't even 30 years old. And I have a choice. I have a choice to mold the life in the way that I want, and the way that on my deathbed I would be proud of how I've lived it, and I wouldn't live with regret. I call it regret tax. We all pay the tax at some point, whether we pay it down the line or we pay it now. So I guess to relate back to you, if you're experiencing or wanting to experience anything like this, it's going to be hard. It's going to be the most challenging thing that you've ever done. There's moments where I've never felt emotion like it. I've never felt love like it. It's so hard to explain. I've never seen visuals like anything. It's like you've went to another planet. But it's real. It's not like a dream where it's hazy. It's like so clear. You've got your eyes open. It's just the most crazy thing ever. It's so hard to explain. But at that point, I realized that all the minutia, all the stuff that I worried about and people's judgment were all from people that probably wouldn't go to my funeral. And what's the point? What's the point in worrying about people and people's opinion of you that does not matter? It doesn't matter. You're the only person that's going to have to live with yourself on your deathbed and decisions that you made in your life. So as I say, that was genuinely like 6 months of therapy in a few hours. And there was a few other things like the visuals on the first day where I looked at my hand, and when I looked at my hand, there was 6 fingers, and it wasn't like, like when you close your eyes and you think, right, well, that's going to go away, but no, it didn't go away at all. And what that told me, again, not in words, but was that I couldn't take people for face value. And I really struggle with my relationships with people in general. I struggle a lot with like rejection, whether it's from people leaving the program. Sometimes if people leave the program after 2 years, it hurts me. I've never really come out publicly and said that. And it's all of this point of like not feeling good enough, not feeling valued, not feeling... And that comes from the thing that I explored in day 2, which is RSD, which is rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, which is very common in people with ADHD, with the amount of negative feedback that they've got their whole life. And I basically relived every time that I was rejected, which I'll go into in day 2. And I guess just to talk about like the emotions that you feel, the emotional roller coaster that you go on is just ridiculous. One minute you're laughing, the next minute you're crying, and it's just it's too hard to explain. And then again, day two, same thing, same process happened. I thought it's not going to work for me again this second time. Took hours, I felt, before it kicked in, and but you were allowed an extra shot that day, a third shot. And my primary intention, after not exploring it fully on the first day, was to explore that whole rejection sensitivity. They talk about purging, right? And purging is like vomiting, diarrhea, and it's about you symbolically getting cleansing out your whatever you're dealing with. And I just couldn't do it. Like couldn't purge. Um, like I kept feeling the need to do it or wanting, like not even necessarily wanting to do it, just almost like everyone else around you is being sick. Or and then I found myself fixating on a bottle of water, and the bottle of water on it said H2O. And don't know why in my brain that was like very prevalent at that time, and I couldn't figure out why for hours. And I think I'll tell you on day 3 or 4 why that was. So I relived a lot of the with the visuals and I guess realizations. I relived all of the things that all the times, I wouldn't say all the times, but a lot of the times that I'd suppressed, that I was rejected as a child. And that third shot really just took everything completely to like before I'd had that third shot of ayahuasca, there was these napkins beside you. And I remember every realization that I was having, because there's several, some smaller, some bigger. I remember having every realization, and I would take a napkin and I would just put it to one side so that I would remember, that I would try and remember that that was a realization that I had. So that was me trying to control the situation, me trying to preempt anything. And when I had that third shot, I was basically transformed to another planet. Uh, one of the shamans there was my wife, and then transformed into a llama. And I've no real reason for saying that other than that's what happened. Um, but some of the stuff that I experienced was in my childhood that I'd actually forgotten about. Stuff that I'd obviously suppressed in my brain, because memories are a funny thing, because a lot of the kind of traumatic events in your life that might not even seem that traumatic are things about the way that you felt as a child. I would do things to try and fit in and not be authentically myself as a kid, being maybe a bit dishonest, exaggerating things, lying, just to like make an impression or to be accepted into my peers. I was a very unconfident kid. Times that I was humiliated in school, like where I was drinking at the school ceilidh, and then it was my birthday and someone said that they want you up on the stage at your birthday, and everyone was laughing because I got up on stage and they didn't actually want me up on stage. That sort of thing, just all the I can laugh at it now, but all those little times where you just felt so unaccepted by anyone else around you, and that's probably how pretty much I've lived my life, because I've always felt very different to people, which autism, ADHD has a lot to answer for that, I guess. I also experienced a lot of my relationship with alcohol. For me, alcohol is definitely an escapism. I used to drink and become a completely different person uh, throughout whenever I started drinking at like 13. Uh, and whenever I would drink, I'd black out, I wouldn't remember anything. But that was my ability to escape. And because I would black out, the consequences weren't necessarily there, other than waking up with a burst eye, broken nose, a black eye because I'd fallen over. Um, and it was all just to do with the fact that I couldn't handle feeling so judged. Whereas when I lost my inhibitions and I got drunk, then I would forget about it. And there was some other stuff that I probably, yeah, I don't really want to share in this video, but it's not that, well, it is relevant to me, but it's not, you don't need to hear about it. So that was day 2. Day 3, no ayahuasca, you get a day off, and you also do something called cambo, which is frog poison, and they basically burn your skin, 3 dots in your skin, and then they put the frog poison on, and some people swell out and their face is this size, but nothing. I mean, you get a head rush, but nothing, for whatever reason, nothing happened to me. I don't know why. But moving on. Day 4. Day 4, I thought, right, I've got everything I came for. I know I need to deal with rejection. I know everything's in front of me. What's the point in this last day? Is kind of how I felt. I just wanted to go home at this point. But I trusted it. And you begin the ceremony with a double shot, and I spent probably the vast majority of the time resisting the urge to vomit. And for whatever reason, this seemed to kind of symbolize for me the discomfort that I feel in not living in the present moment and always looking at the future of something that might never happen because other people had purged and I just hadn't. That day or the day before, I found a mole. I found a mole on my stomach that looked a bit abnormal. And then basically that showed up in a way that you'll obviously be able to decipher through. But I guess before I talk about that, I kept yawning. I was yawning for hours, just constantly. I've never yawned so much in my life. And it was because I was just tired of being someone that I wasn't. So you might actually see from around this date, my content on Instagram either stopped completely or it was completely different. It was no longer recipes because I felt as if I created this like persona online of someone who I wasn't. And because I no longer really cared about making money, I stopped taking clients on for the last 10 months. So obviously I'm launching an app now. But I came to a realization recently, like I do really want to help people and I enjoy my job. What I didn't enjoy is the whole rat race of chasing certain things like I experienced in the first few days that really don't matter. And I'm only saying this before I tell you the last part. And I had a flashback where whenever I was, I don't know what age I was, but I found a lump in my testicles. And I went to the doctors, and at that point, I thought I had cancer at that young age, and I thought I'm too young to die. And as someone who definitely catastrophizes things in their life, it was how I felt. And then shortly after, the same realization came about this mole, and that's really, really hit me hard. I have a son that was just about to be born. He's now turned 1. A daughter who's about to turn 3, and they would have grown up without a dad. And I would have been focusing on the wrong things. And I kept getting this kind of, these words of, it's right in front of you. It's right in front of you. Rather than delaying the future that's completely uncertain. So the mole was just a constant thought for hours, and having to ruminate and sit with that for hours was extremely, extremely difficult. And when I got back, I did get it checked, and I had to go through a process. I had a bit of a cancer scare. Luckily, I'm okay. But how real that was made me just realize that I do want to be here. So I went to ayahuasca not wanting to be here, not wanting to wake up, to realizing that the thought of actually leaving and not being here was not what I wanted. I just wanted my situation to change. And finally, you're meant to purge, and I hadn't purged the whole time. I wasn't even sick with Campbell, and I was yawning because I kept saying to myself, "What are you fighting? What are you fighting?" And I was fighting myself. And I referenced earlier on the H2O, the water bottle, and my version of purging was crying. Never cried like this in my life, I don't think. And after that, it ended. And that was it. And that's obviously what I needed to do. I needed to let it out. It was obviously such pent up emotion that I'd maybe built up for years that I needed to release. And how I felt after those 4 days was almost unstoppable, but not for business, just for life. So like I need to tell everyone about this. But a year on, I can kind of give you a bit more context because I struggled after it massively. And what I'm going to tell you is something that, because I met my therapist there, um, who's my current therapist. She told me an analogy that I really liked. Ayahuasca shows you, it's a helicopter that takes you to the top of the mountain and shows you what you need to see and drops you back down at the bottom. So when you integrate it into your life, you come back. No one else has experienced it. No one else has went through what you've went through. And you're just going back into the same struggles that you're facing on a daily basis. Never mind, 2 weeks later, my son was born, and now I have 2 kids and a job that wasn't serving me, living in a country that wasn't serving me. And one thing I didn't mention is that I made the decision at that point to move to Spain, which we decided and didn't end up doing years before. And at the time of filming this, I'm moving in less than 2 months' time. And the biggest thing that I took away from it was that everything is now. It's not in the future. And focusing too much on the future, which is completely uncertain, whether it's that I had to have a cancer scare to realize that, definitely opened up my eyes. And I feel as if it made me grow up. I'm gonna have to listen to this back because I don't know if I've done it justice. But what I will say is that if you're ever considering ayahuasca and you're intrigued about it and you're struggling, then it might be for you. If you're intrigued about it and you want to go just to experience it, it's maybe not for you. That being said, everyone has stuff, and whether you're ignorant to the stuff that you've got going on, or you're suppressed it, or you don't want to deal with it, this allows you to drop your ego, and you have to, in order to come to these realizations. And as I said, I do think this is going to be something, psychedelic led therapy is going to be something that is going to be extremely prevalent in the near future. But yeah, the integration was really difficult. When my son was born, all the pressure, stopped taking clients on for so long, because to build a business, to build a successful business, people talk about not taking ayahuasca. I spoke to James Smith about this on the podcast. The guy, Sean O'Malley, who's a world champion UFC fighter, not taking ayahuasca because he didn't want to lose that grit, determination, a little bit of ego that makes you financially successful until he was done with it. And I understand that because I didn't care. I didn't care, and still, to an extent, don't care about making money. I don't care. I care about living in alignment with what I actually value, and it's not material things. We get rid of our car. I'm getting the train into town, like, and it's not that I don't have nice stuff. I've still got a nice house and things that we're selling and moving to Spain. But the point of it was that has changed my life, but the integration is still going on. It wasn't easy, still isn't easy, and it's not that everything's fixed afterwards. And I think I need to make that clear. It's more that it shows you what you need to fix. I guess in conclusion, do I regret taking it? Absolutely not. Was it enjoyable? Absolutely not. Did it change my life? Absolutely. So that's my experience of ayahuasca. I'm going to have to edit this a bit, I think. But if you've made it this far, I appreciate you listening in. Even if it was out of nosiness, hopefully that I've articulated it in a way that, I don't know, easy to listen to in some way. It's pretty raw. I've got a couple of bullet points here that I wrote at the time after, so I didn't forget. But other than that, it's a off the cuff thing. I'd love to know your thoughts below. Bit different from my food videos, but yeah, there's no call to actions at all. But I'd love to know your experience, any thoughts below, just out of intrigue, and I'll see you in the next one, I guess. Bye bye.